Now let me make one thing clear. I am very thankful for this nice new set of teeth, but that does not make me pro-domestic violence. Just like being thankful for my life does not make me pro-rape. But people actually say that to me. Like a lot of people, especially on university campuses during Q&A. They'll say, oh, so what you're saying is that if abortion had been legal, then you wouldn't be here today. You know, if your birth mother hadn't been raped, you wouldn't be here today either. So does that mean that you're pro-rape? They actually say that to me. And I explain to them that there is a huge moral difference because I did exist and my life would have been ended because I would have been killed. And that is a huge moral difference. I may not look the same as I did when I was 4 years old or 4 days old yet in one of my mother's womb, but that was still undeniably me, and I would have been killed. Well, at the time that I had been beat up, I had really hit rock bottom. From all outward appearances, I had so much going for me. I excelled in academics and athletics. I was attending a great law school, but I was totally deteriorating in the inside over this whole issue of value. And that is when the Lord called me back to Him. Now, the first time I'd ever heard the message of the gospel, I was 15. Up to that point, I'd had lots of friends invite me to church over the years, but my takeaway was always that I never understood why I couldn't go up and have crackers and juice with everyone else. Because no one ever shared their faith with me. They just thought it was cool to make their little Jewish friend to church with them. And then I had a friend who invited me to hear a special youth speaker who laid out the message of the gospel. And I knew that this was true, and I believed that night. But then, basically, after 9 months, I no longer had a ride. I felt forsaken by my Christian friends, and I ended up spending some of the toughest years of my life away from God, away from church, on my own doing things my way and the world's way until He called me back. And it's like He said, are you done? Are you going to let me take over now? And it's been amazing. And I've had people say to me, oh, look at you. Look what you've done with your life and what you've overcome. You're a survivor. I'm like, no, you don't understand. When I was in control, I totally messed everything up. And the fact that I'm okay today, which is still debatable, has everything to do with what Christ has done in my life, and it has been amazing. Well, let me take you back to when I was 18, and I first learned how I was conceived. Of course, at that point, I thought about my birth mother, and I thought, she must hate me. This has absolutely got to be the worst thing that's ever happened to her in her life. She is never going to want to meet me. She probably wanted to abort me. But then again, I had it all figured out that if somehow I could just meet her and if I could hear that maybe there was some mistake, that this was not how I was conceived, then again, I could feel good about myself and I could feel safe. Like I wouldn't have to still feel like I was a target. I didn't want to be part of that classification, conceived and raped. Who would? So I ended up being one of the first people in Michigan to have a judge allow my caseworker to try to contact my birth mother and see if she wanted to meet me. And it worked. I was going to college out of state at the time. I finally received a letter with my birth name, which was Judy Ann Miracle. So I was a miracle, baby. I thought that was kind of cool. And I had her name, Joanne, with her phone number. Trembling, I called her up, and she said that she was sorry to hear that I already knew. But then she proceeded to fill me in on some horrific details that I was totally unequipped to hear. She was only 4'10". She weighed 90 pounds, really petite. A single mom heading to the grocery store at night right down the street from her home. The guy jumped out of the bushes with a knife, dragged her to a field, slid open her clothes with a knife, and she basically went on to describe for me in graphic how he brutally raped her. And that's how I was conceived. That was so hard to hear. For some reasons. First of all, to think that I was conceived out of a truly worst case scenario. I just felt totally worthless. Like garbage. Because of people who would say that my life was like garbage. That I was disposable. And then I had to realize that my biological father was a really bad man. She said she had gone to several police sign-ups and she stopped going because she wouldn't recognize his face, but they knew that this was a serial rapist. There have been several of these rapes in that area with the same signature of the crime. And then all these years I had only dreamed so much of meeting her. I had written poetry about meeting her. And so to hear that she had been violated like this really pained me. We arranged for me to fly home and meet her on her 51st birthday, nearly 22 years ago. And in the meantime, she sent me photos and a letter. And she wrote, "My dearest Rebecca, hoping by now that the shock of finding out all the details of your birth are forgotten. For that was not reason of having to give up something as beautiful as you were, nothing as precious as a baby. Mostly when you go through the 9 months and the birth, all alone, feeling like no one loves you. But you were so perfect and pretty. All these years I had nothing of you, nothing saying you were part of me, just the memory of carrying a baby that I hoped someday would try to find her real mother, as I always wanted to know my baby. You were always within my thoughts, you were always within my heart, mostly in July. It seems like a lifetime, I know. When I was sick 2 years ago, I thought I would never get to know my little girl. Would you please even get me a copy of the letter you sent to the Oakland County judge? It made me cry. Also, I would like copies of your poems. These are things I would like to read. It's been a long 3 weeks looking forward to our meeting. I didn't know how to express my inner feelings, and then she put in caps, "It's so great, big, beautiful. It's always been my dream. I am so happy. I am crying." And then she wrote in closing, "A love that ate at me for 19 years. My daughter at last. With love, your mom, Joanne." Well, that was just all my dreams come true. I felt so affirmed, and I felt like, yes, I was wanted. I flew home, had a wonderful reunion weekend with her. The next day, she had a huge family reunion for me. I got to meet my half-brother, which was really weird to think we could have grown up together. 6 years later, I met my half-sister when I flew down to Florida for a 5-generation photo. It was the 4th time in a row that they had 5 generations of women alive. I got to room with my grandmother at the time, which was so cool. But after this initial reunion weekend, I flew back to college, went to a few meetings of Students for Life. I didn't get involved at that point because I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. But it gave me the support and courage I felt I needed to finally call her and ask her about abortion. Because I still needed to know. And she told me that if abortion had been legal in Michigan at the time, that she would have aborted me. And I said, "Well, you don't mean if you had to do it all over again, right?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, what about everything you said in that letter? Not reason enough, having to give up something as beautiful as you were? What about when you told me that when you were sick 2 years ago, that the only thing that kept you going was the hope that someday you'd be able to meet me? What about that? You didn't have that." And she said to me, "You don't know what it was like." And I know that that's true. In fact, she's doing great. She has a wonderful husband, a beautiful home, despite the utter horror of her saying that to me. That the totality of my entire existence was worth nothing. I still chose to nurture a relationship with her, to honor her for the role that she did play in my life, and frankly, I just thought that if I was good enough, then she'd change her mind. Well, by the time she did change her mind about abortion 6 years later, I was in a really good place in my life where I no longer needed to hear that for my own well-being. But it was still great to hear. I was with her when she was making baby clothes for my niece down in Florida who was in a crisis pregnancy with her first great-grandchild. And she said to me, you know, I'm really glad that she changed her mind about abortion. Or she said, I'm really glad that she decided to have this baby. And by the way, I've changed my mind about all that. 2 days later, Norma McCorvey, Jane Roe, announced the very same thing to the nation, that she had changed her mind about abortion after years of having worked in an abortion clinic, yet never actually having had one herself. Now, her daughter is around my age. The trial date down in Texas is in a footnote of the U.S. Supreme Court's opinion. I gasped the first time I read that whole opinion in law school. I was born July 22nd, 1969. The trial date in Texas was July 22nd, 1970. It was on my first birth date. And the U.S. Supreme Court decision was exactly 3.5 years to my birth date. So I just barely made it. But so did her daughter. And I figured that if they met, reality could have been that she could have stood before her and said, yes, I'm the one. I'm the one who wanted to abort you so badly that I took it all the way up to United States Supreme Court. It's pretty intense, but that is reality. And I imagine it would be pretty overwhelming for you to learn that your mom is Jane Roe and that you were the intended target of that landmark litigation. People forget that there's a real person walking the face of this earth who was targeted for abortion in this case. We're not talking about some kind of fictitious, philosophical, theoretical, legal entity called a fetus. But there are real people involved in this. Don't ever let people forget that we're talking about real people, and especially when you're talking about Roe v. Wade. And now today, Norma McCorvey is an outspoken pro-life advocate as well. She spoke at my local pregnancy center's annual garden party 3 years ago. I spoke at that event as well. It was held on my birth date, which is the anniversary of the trial date of Roe v. Wade. I had my birth mother with me, and I was 8 months pregnant with my youngest daughter, Contessa. And so I have a photo of the 4 of us together up on my website, and it's a beautiful photo, but it's one that was only made possible because abortion was